It was 1993. I had just moved to California after graduating college, and I needed a job. I got lucky and found this small program called Youth in Action, based in a rented church building in San Francisco's Mission District. On any Saturday, you could see young people wearing blue pants, white t-shirts, and yellow hard hats, picking up trash in Dolores Park or gathering recyclables on Ocean Beach. And it wasn't just physical labor. All the crews explored the ecosystem and sociology of San Francisco's neighborhoods through our urbanology curriculum. I was what you call a youth worker, which is a term for educators who work in nonprofit or community organizations and offer all-purpose mentoring, guidance, and support to young people. If you look closely, you can see me right there at age 22. Two experiences at Youth in Action shaped the direction of my work and what I do today with See You Engage. The first was with a kid named Jed, who started in Youth in Action in 7th grade and stayed involved as a peer mentor and a leader throughout high school. Jed, who's of Filipino background, had a wicked sense of humor and was an excellent student. So it surprised me during the spring of his senior year when he told me he wasn't going to one of California's public colleges or universities. When I looked into it, it turned out his school hadn't offered him the prep courses that are required for four-year college. And this was true for a lot of public high schools in California, especially serving communities of color and low-income communities. You could be a terrific student and graduate without being eligible for four-year college. I had been aware of inequities in education, but this was a stunningly clear example of how a system was making it harder for certain kids at certain schools to achieve their dreams. Seeing Jed's aspirations deterred by a system that was not designed for his success led me to start to question whether the work I was doing was enough. We could have a lovely program in the heart of the Mission District, full of learning and joy, but what about the larger systems and policies of disinvestment that were acting upon us? We could try to help individual students like Jed, quote, beat the odds, but what about changing the odds altogether? Soon after that, I visited another youth program right around the corner on 22nd Street called Youth Making a Change, or YMAC. YMAC was holding a community meeting about an upcoming campaign to promote summer jobs for youth. Now, we have Youth in Action, we have Youth Making a Change, these are similar kinds of names, but there was a kind of a different thing happening in YMAC. YMAC had t-shirts too, but theirs said things like, "Jobs Stop Violence." YMAC's approach to youth work challenged some of my own assumptions. The organization wasn't about fixing low-income youth of color. Unlike so many nonprofit organizations that highlight all the things that young people are missing or lack, their focus was on what is wrong with the systems that surround young people. YMAC and youth activist groups like them investigated the root causes of problems students were experiencing in their everyday lives, including the problem that Jed experienced with his school regarding the lack of college prep classes. These young people were also raising moral questions about rights and justice, which inspired me. As a child, growing up in a Jewish household, retelling stories of oppression and survival every April at the Passover table, the concept of injustice was familiar to me. And it was common to draw connections to contemporary struggles. But without experiencing this persecution or injustice myself, it felt distant. The issues that teenagers were talking about in YMAC, however, were immediate and urgent. Youth around California were mobilizing around issues that affected them directly. They led city campaigns to fund programs for children and mobilized to fight state initiatives that would increase prison spending at the expense of schools and would criminalize youth of color. All of these experiences, working with kids like Jed, supporting the YMAC campaign, and seeing different approaches to working with youth, raised big questions for me, and I wanted to learn more. And then I got to graduate school. So graduate school, I was curious to see what people were saying about how young people thought, I was curious to see what people were saying about how young people thought about issues of justice. I learned that the dominant paradigm about adolescent moral development was based on interviews with white male Harvard students from the 1960s. And then I encountered the scholar G. Stanley Hall, who invented the science of adolescence in his 1907 book. Hall wrote, The teens are emotionally unstable and pathic. It is a natural impulse to experience hot and perfervid psychic states and is characterized by emotionalism. That's the textbook. Talk about miseducation. I've read this quote many times, and I still don't know what perfervid means. So you know, I don't. But here's the good part. This contrast between the vibrancy and purpose that I saw and experienced as a youth worker and what I was reading in some of the canonical literature fueled the work I've been doing ever since, and that I continue to do as part of a collective in CU Engage. Now, our center works to address a range of kinds of public challenges, but one thread that we've pursued in our research team has been to really understand more about young people as moral and political actors and challenge deficit-based narratives about teenagers. And we don't just study about youth. We partner with youth organizations and schools and students themselves to use research and assessment to design and support learning environments. Some youth organizing groups rightfully get big headlines for being activists out on the streets, arguing for their right to live and work and go to school in the country where they've grown up, and to be treated with dignity and safety by their schools and the police. We all saw the Parkland students gain national attention for their efforts to address gun violence. But I gained just as much inspiration from the work students are doing behind the scenes, usually with adults in their classrooms and community centers, doing the slow and patient work of organizing around local issues that affect them. Just 2 weeks ago, I visited an after-school program at a high school in far northeast Denver. And I want to ask you to picture the scene. It was a cold Wednesday afternoon, a little after school had ended, and actually it was maybe 3 weeks ago because it was that day when it snowed, like in early October. And when we arrived, students were streaming out of the school. After finding our way through the school, we walked into a dimly lit classroom where about 15 students were in the middle of a spirited discussion. 3 juniors were facilitating the meeting. The teacher was sitting by his desk, quietly working. The students brought up all kinds of issues: the way they were treated by teachers and security, the quality of relationships with adults in the building, and concerns about bullying. I sat with a small group of students who were dismayed that fewer families were sending their kids to the school because of classes being cut from the budget, such as drama, theater, and honors. And as other families heard about these cuts, it meant even fewer students were enrolling, which meant fewer funds going to that school. As one 10th grader said, right next to me, it's a vicious cycle. A vicious cycle. The meeting was supposed to end at 4, but at 4:25, the group was still talking and brainstorming their next steps. And in telling this story, I want to point out that these are not, I'm not saying this to say these are the exceptional students, they're not just the good ones who are different from the others. No. These are ordinary kids who responded to an invitation to be part of a space where they have a voice and to collaborate with adults in their building to participate in decisions that affect their lives. I get to support this work through our partnership with Denver Public Schools, and our team is developing a playbook with lessons and resources that support young people in doing research and then developing policy solutions to address these systemic issues. This enthusiasm among the DPS students echoes what is an exciting moment for us as a country, I think. Youth who are stepping onto the public stage are injecting accountability and moral clarity to our political life. Imagine what would happen if we, educators, policymakers, social workers, school leaders, parents, started to challenge and rethink our assumptions about adolescents and engage them as people. When I imagine this, I see schools that are more welcoming for everyone and that sustain young people's identities and push them to new heights. I see powerful communities where, to quote the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, children can express their views freely, be heard in all matters affecting them, and have their views taken seriously in accordance with their age and maturity. I've spent most of the past 25 years of my life working with young people as they try to make a change in their communities. And that experience makes me more confident in their wisdom and in their abilities, not less. After all, they're the ones still talking at 4:25 when they could have gone home at 4. 25 years have taught me this. Young people know a vicious cycle when they see one. Our world is calling for us to fix these vicious cycles. I believe we can. when adults and youth work together, rooted in trust and collective work.